I'm a single father. I have raised my son alone because when he was just a few days old, his mother suddenly decided she doesn't want a child anymore. She claimed she's not ready to have a child and refused to even feed him or hold him. I wanted to give her some time. I thought that maybe it's just postpartum depression or something. I was ready to be there for her, but she was serious. She packed her stuff and left the hospital. Her last words were that she wants to see neither me or our son ever again. I have never seen her since, and I kind of feel like mother-in-law called had something to do with it, because during her pregnancy she was talking all the time about how young her daughter is, and how appropriate of a moment this is for her to have a child. I don't have any proof, and I can't tell anything for sure, but I feel like mother-in-law called somehow secretly persuaded her to take this step for whatever reason. So I was left alone with an infant in my hands. It definitely wasn't easy. I was just 21 years old. I had to leave college and work very hard to give my son everything he needed. Fortunately, I wasn't completely alone. There were people who helped me to get through the hardest period. People who babysat him while I was working, who gave me advice on how to take care of a baby, and I'll be forever thankful to them. When he grew up a little, it became easier. I could send him to a kindergarten and work without asking people to take care of him while I'm not there. During all this time, I hope to hear from his mother. I hope that she'll eventually come around and realize you can't just leave your child like a worthless piece of trash. But even though I had left her my contacts, and she could call me or write me a letter or something, she didn't. I never heard from her. She never once used her rights to visit him. When he was little, he often asked me why did his mother leave him? Why didn't she want him? And I didn't know what to answer because I always tried not to speak badly of his mother in front of him. Now my son is 25 years old. He's a hardworking, educated young man, and I'm so proud of him, and I'm proud of myself that I was able to raise him to be a good person. We stopped talking about his mother a long time ago. It was his initiative. He was like, well, if she doesn't want to be with us, then it's her loss and there's nothing we can do about it. So recently, mother-in-law called appeared on our doorstep. Without a call, without any kind of notification, she was just there, and she had come to visit her grandson. I couldn't believe my ears, and at first, I almost didn't recognize her, because so many years are past after all, and she was behaving as if she was a caring grandmother who had come to see her grandchild like she does all the time. Not like she was gone for 25 years. When my son saw her, he didn't recognize her either. I have shown him pictures of his mother and his grandmother just in case they show up one day, but I never really thought that they would. She ran up to him and hugged him just like a loving grandmother would, asking how he's doing and how big and beautiful he has become. And he pushed her away and looked kind of confused. I told him that it's his grandmother who has randomly shown up to visit him, and he was like, oh, and walked away from her. My mother-in-law called didn't take this reaction very well. She looked at me and was like, what have you taught him if he doesn't even say hello to his grandmother? He's looking at me as if I'm a stranger. Haven't you told him about his mother and me or shown him our pictures? Well, technically, you are a stranger, mother-in-law called W. I've never seen you in person. So why are you so surprised? You show up out of thin air after 25 years when he's all grown up and expect him to treat you with love. Isn't it kind of delusional? My son said, Dad did show me your picture, but I needed no picture. I needed you to be there for me. He was quite hateful with her, throwing question after question at her, and mother-in-law called responses were so incredibly narrow-minded. It looked like she wasn't expecting him to ask any questions. He asked her where his mother was, and mother-in-law called was like, oh. She's doing very well. She's living together with a great man, and she has 2 nice kids. She has gotten over that misunderstanding about your birth." She was acting as if her daughter was the victim here, as if we were the ones who left her. He asked her, why did his mother abandon him? Mother-in-law called, said, well, she was such a young girl. It would be craziness for her to have a child at that age. She had her whole life ahead of her, and a baby would only be an obstacle. You must understand it. She didn't want to lose her freedom. Honestly, her daughter was older than me when our son was born. She was 24. I don't think it's too early to have a child. It's not like she was 14 or something. Actually, age has nothing to do with it. I could have given up my son too. I was very young as well. But I didn't because I loved him and I wanted to be his father. At this point, I wanted to show mother-in-law called the door. Obviously, she wasn't welcome in our house. But my son stopped me. He had one more question. He asked why mother-in-law called didn't want to be his grandmother. His mother left him. Fine, but why did mother-in-law called leave him too? Mother-in-law called said, well, I had no time to take care of you. I was a young woman too. I had my life too. And grandkids are only obligated to take care of grandparents when they're old, and that's why I'm here. Then my son told her to leave and never come back. He said he doesn't want to see her ever again, and he won't help her with anything. And as she was leaving, she attacked me like that's what I thought. A man alone cannot raise a proper human being. Such a rude and impolite boy. He would have turned out better in an orphanage than with you. So according to mother-in-law called E, the conclusion is mechi. Don't have children while you're young, or if you do, feel free to leave them and then come back a few decades later, and they'll love you even though they have never received any kind of care from you. But seriously, what the hell was she expecting? Top comments. I'm actually glad this happened. You kicked ass as a father and raised someone who sounds like a strong young man. This strong young man just got to see the difference between the father who raised him and the grandmother and mother who abandoned him for utterly ridiculous reasons. This smells a lot like Granny was trying to butter up her grandson for some reason, either free room and board or money. From the sound of things, she wasn't expecting your son's reaction. Story 2. A 23 female found out my mom's 45. Family history was a complete lie, ended up uncovering the truth behind a 70-year-old conspiracy, and now she won't speak to me and says I've destroyed our family's name. 3 hours ago, my mom decided to do an ancestry DNA test for my grandma to see if she had siblings from her father's side that she could connect with. She never met her dad and didn't know anything about him other than he was a British missionary. Not even his name. He wasn't part of her life or on her birth certificate. And my great-grandmother died before my grandmother had the chance to find out more. My mom shared the Ancestry account info with me, not very tech-savvy, and unfortunately, we didn't find anyone that wasn't a very distant relative. But, come to find out, she wasn't British at all. 50% of her DNA was a mix of West African, which was expected, but the other 50% was based in the Middle East. Levant region specifically. She was, however, 8% European, but it wasn't even British, it was Italian, which surprised us more. The test wasn't the best on the market. Results were very vague and just gave general area rather than specific country. Plus, it didn't have a large user database. Safe to say Mom and I were very confused. But she kind of brushed it off and assumed his family were immigrants to the UK rather than British by blood, which was plausible, I guess. She told my grandmother she was African, Italian, and Persian, and left it at that. I felt like there was more to the story, but we didn't have enough info at the time, so we just moved on. Fast forward to the present, and I did a test from 23andMe. It was a much more comprehensive test than the one Mom did, with better ancestry profile and much larger user database. My results finally got answers on the 11 DNA we had gotten hints of from my grandmother's test. I was 11% Lebanese, a lovely equivalent to a great-grandparent being almost fully Lebanese. And that test also helped me discover a third or fourth cousin that was currently living in Lebanon. I reached out to him and we connected, and I asked if he knew of any connections to my country and his family's recent history. He told me his great-grandfather's brother had moved and settled here with his family in the 1920s. He gave me a bit more info about him, but not much as most, who knew the details were now long dead. I went on the long search from there to find out the truth about my grandmother's story. It took many months, searching through old records, talking to many of the older Lebanese in my community, as well as my own extended family, and finally, I put together the whole story, or as much of it as I was going to get. Turns out my great-grandmother had been born up north in a village not too far from the capital. She'd moved down to find better paying work, and that's how she ended up a nanny to this wealthy Lebanese family. She worked there for 3 years. At some point, she started an affair with the eldest son, who was already married with 2 kids. She was their nanny. She got pregnant, was given hush money, and then returned to her village. That's when she told her family the story that we knew, of that she met a British missionary who had promised to marry her but went back to his country without telling her and only left her a little money for the baby. The family took her back in, and they even named my grandmother after a former British queen. But my great-grandmother ended up passing away when my grandmother was only 9. It was then that she was sent to city to her aunt that had married and settled down there. There she eventually met my grandfather, and they had a whopping 11 kids, my mom being the second youngest. No one in the family knew of my great-grandmother's secret, except the aunt that my grandmother happened to be sent to. She only knew the truth because her sister had confided in her on a particularly rough night when my grandmother was a baby, and then they never really spoke of it again. I eventually spoke to my great-great-aunt, and with all the evidence I had gathered, she decided it was finally time to tell her sister's story. When I put together everything I had gathered, I went to my grandmother. I told her the truth about everything, showed her pics of her dad and even her half-siblings who I had tried to reach out to, but they had wanted nothing to do with their father's affair baby. We both cried and talked for hours, and she just kept thanking me. Her father had died a year before I started searching, and I wished I had looked earlier when my mom first did that test, because maybe my grandmother could have met him then. I have a lot of guilt and regret about that, but there's nothing I can do but accept it. I went to Grandma first, but then told Mom everything after, and she went into full-on denial mode. Despite all the evidence, she refused to believe it, and even tried to convince Grandma that they were lies too, but she refused to listen to her. She found out I had talked to many people while gathering info, and that made her even more furious. She claims I ran our family name through the mud and put out family business on the streets that I had no right to. It's been weeks, and she's barely spoken to me since I told her. I've tried to apologize and explain, but nothing works. I don't know what to do. She thinks I should have left it all alone, but I think Grandma deserved truth. And I don't regret it, but maybe I'm in the wrong. Maybe I should have just left well enough alone. Context. There's a fairly significant Lebanese population in my country that has been here for a few generations following conflicts in their region. They're generally lovely people, but some are quite condescending to the native population and can be ignorant racist. Mom has had some pretty bad experiences with a couple of them. And though she's also good friends with quite a few Lebanese people in our community, she has a lot of reservations with them and wouldn't want to be actually related to them. Which is why I think she kinda ignored that part passability at the time of the first test and hates the idea now. Genuinely thanks to everyone for all the supportive comments and suggestions. It definitely helps, and I'll be getting to responding to them all today. But they're also making me question some things regarding the nature of my great-grandmother's relationship with her boss. And I'm actually visiting my grandma today for the first time in a little while, and my great-aunt lives with her too. So hopefully I'll get to talk to her a bit and get some more clarification and answers on that as well, to talk to my grandma about her reaching out to my mom and seeing if she can broker some peace between us herself. Also, thanks for dropping your own DNA stories. They're so fascinating and I'm enjoying reading them. Top comments. Your mother's shooting the messenger. She was okay investigating until you got results that rocked her sense of identity. So now she's lashing out at you for finding those results. It's not rational. And you did nothing wrong. I would suggest giving her time and space to work through her feelings without using you for target practice. You did right by your grandmother and great-grandmother. It sounds like your grandmother was happy to have it, and you had the blessing of the person best situated to speak on your great-grandmother's behalf. This kind of stuff goes with the territory of getting a DNA test. 23andMe even warns people that it could bring up things that they might find hard to accept. You aren't wrong for investigating your heritage and looking for the truth. Your mom is upset, but that doesn't mean you did anything wrong. Hopefully, over time, she will get over it.